Rome conquered almost everyone, except one fearless African queen. Her name was Amanirenas, the Kandake of the Kingdom of Kush, a brilliant military strategist who famously lost an eye in the heat of battle. She became a living symbol of defiance against the world's most powerful empire. This is not just a story of war, it's a story of resistance, resilience, and the relentless pursuit of freedom. This is the story of the one-eyed warrior queen who challenged an emperor, tormented his legions with 30,000 soldiers, and carved out a legacy of African strength that echoes through the millennia. This is the story of Kandake Amanirenas and how she brought an empire to its knees. To really get how huge this showdown was, we need to understand the world these two powers lived in. In the late 1st century BCE, the world map was being redrawn by one dominant force: Rome. The Roman Republic was dead. From its ashes, the Roman Empire had risen, forged in the fires of civil war. At its head was a man of boundless ambition and ruthless efficiency: Gaius Octavius, the adopted son of Julius Caesar. He'd crushed his rivals, Mark Antony and the Egyptian queen Cleopatra, at the Battle of Actium in 31 BCE. Egypt, the ancient breadbasket of the Mediterranean, was no longer a kingdom. It was a Roman province, the personal property of its new master. Octavian, taking the name Augustus, was now the first and most powerful emperor of Rome. The Roman war machine was a marvel. Its legions were professional, disciplined, and brutally effective. After securing Egypt, the wealthiest prize of all, the next logical step for an ambitious emperor like Augustus was to push further south, to secure the frontier and tap into the fabled wealth of the lands beyond. That land was known to them as Nubia, but its real name was Kush. And Kush was no simple territory ripe for the picking. South of the sun-scorched Egyptian border, along the fertile bends of the Great Nile, lay a civilization with a history as long and as proud as Egypt's. This was the Kingdom of Kush, an African powerhouse that had thrived for over 1,000 years. It was a land rich in gold, ivory, and ebony, and most importantly, it was a master of iron, giving it a serious military edge in an age of metal weapons. Kush and Egypt shared a long, complicated history. They were rivals, trading partners, and at one point, the Kushites had even conquered Egypt. For nearly a century, starting around 747 BCE, a line of Kushite kings ruled as the pharaohs of Egypt's 25th dynasty, the Black Pharaohs, uniting the entire Nile Valley. Though they were eventually pushed back south, the memory of this power was burned into the Kushite identity. Their capital had moved south to the city of Meroe, a bustling hub for trade and industry, safe from northern neighbors. The landscape was dotted with pyramids, steeper and more slender than Egyptian ones, royal tombs for their kings and queens. This was a culture with its own language, gods, and powerful traditions. And one of its most remarkable traditions was the role of women. The rulers of Kush weren't always kings. The kingdom saw a long line of powerful female sovereigns known by the title Kandake. Often Latinized by the Romans as Candace, this wasn't a name, but a title of supreme authority. These weren't women ruling from the shadows. The Kandakes commanded armies, ran the state, and were shown in temple art, just like male pharaohs, smiting their enemies and protecting their realm. They were the living embodiment of the kingdom's power. And as the shadow of Rome fell on Egypt's border, it was a Kandake who held the throne. Her name was Amanirenas. Amanirenas came to power around 40 BCE, a time of massive global upheaval. To the north, Her contemporaries were the famous Cleopatra and Mark Antony, whose war with Augustus was shaking the Mediterranean world. Amanirenas ruled with her husband, King Teretekas, and together they watched the world they knew change forever. The title of Kandake carried immense weight. It signified a line of incredible female leaders. Unlike in Rome, where power was for men only, in Kush, the royal line was often traced through the mother. This influence eventually grew into direct rule, with a series of Kandakes reigning as sole monarchs. Amanirenas inherited this legacy. Her full title, Amanirenas Kora Li Kadwe Li, translates to Amaniras, Kora, and Kandake. The word Kor was the title for a ruling king, so its inclusion alongside Kandake suggests she wasn't just a regent. She was a sovereign ruler with absolute authority. Then, as the storm with Rome gathered, tragedy struck. Her husband, King Teretekas, died. Amanirenas was left as the sole ruler of Kush, responsible for her people and her son, Prince Akinidad. She now faced the terrifying challenge of defending her nation from the most powerful military on the planet, all by herself. She knew the road ahead would be hard. She began to mobilize her people, preparing for the fight she knew was coming. The queen, who inherited a thriving kingdom, now had to become a warrior to save it. Rome's conquest of Egypt in 30 BCE wasn't the end of Augustus's ambition. It was just the beginning. Roman forces began to push south, creeping into the northern territories of Kush. The first Roman prefect of Egypt, Cornelius Gallus, was eager to make a name for himself. He marched his legions south, setting up a Roman presence and, most offensively, imposing taxes. This was an insult that couldn't be ignored. For a kingdom that had once ruled Egypt, the idea of paying tribute to a foreign occupier on their ancestral lands was unthinkable. The Romans saw it as standard procedure. The Kushites saw it as a declaration of war. Roman historians, like the geographer Strabo, paint the Kushites as the aggressors. But history is all about perspective. From the Kushite point of view, Roman encroachment and taxation were the first shots fired. Augustus was openly planning campaigns into Nubia. For Amanirenas, just waiting for the Roman legions to march on her capital wasn't an option. She was a Kandake of Kush. She wouldn't wait to be attacked. She would strike first. Her moment came in 25 BCE. The new Roman prefect, alias Gallus, was distracted, leading a difficult campaign far away in Arabia. With the bulk of Roman forces in Egypt busy elsewhere, Queen Amanirenas saw her chance. She decided to take fate into her own hands. This wasn't going to be a small border raid. This was a full-scale invasion. The queen left her throne in Meroe and took her place where a Kandake belonged, at the head of her army. In 24 BCE, a massive Kushite army, 30,000 strong, stormed across the border into Roman-held Egypt. These weren't the heavily armored legionaries of Rome. Kushite soldiers carried swords, axes, and their famously lethal bows with large shields of raw oxhide. But what they lacked in Roman-style gear, they made up for in ferocity and loyalty to their queen. And their queen was right there with them. Amanirenas, alongside her son, Prince Akinidad, personally led the charge. This was a direct, audacious challenge to Roman authority, and it worked. The Kushite army swept through southern Egypt, overwhelming the unprepared Roman garrisons and capturing the key cities of Syene, Philae, and Elephantine. The Kushites took Roman citizens captive and looted the cities, but Amanirenas wanted more than just treasure. She was making a statement. Throughout Roman territories, statues of Emperor Augustus stood as symbols of his divine power. Amanirenas' forces targeted these symbols, pulling them down in an act of profound defiance. But one trophy was saved for a special fate. The Kushites decapitated a magnificent bronze statue of Augustus. They didn't melt it down. They carried the head all the way back to their capital, Meroe. There, in a brilliant act of psychological warfare, they buried it beneath the steps of a victory temple. They made sure that every person entering that temple would forever trample on the face of their enemy. For nearly 2,000 years, that head lay perfectly preserved in the sand. When archaeologists finally dug it up in 1910, its striking eyes still stared out with the calm, divine power it was meant to project. But its location told a different story. It was the story of a Kushite queen who took the symbol of Roman power and literally put it under her people's feet. It sent a message to Augustus and the world. Kush would not be broken. The first phase of the war was a stunning success, but the war was far from over. The Roman Empire doesn't take insults lightly. The battles that raged on the Egyptian frontier were fierce. Queen Amanirenas wasn't directing the war from some distant palace. She was on the front lines, fighting beside her soldiers. It was in the heat of one of these clashes that her legend was forged in blood. According to the Roman writer Strabo, Amanirenas was grievously wounded in battle. A Roman soldier's blow cost her an eye. To a Roman audience, this might have seemed like a disfiguring defeat. Strabo even called her masculine and blind in one eye, maybe trying to paint her as some kind of monster. But for her people and for history, that wound became her defining feature, a mark not of weakness, but of incredible resilience. She didn't quit the war. After she healed, the one-eyed queen returned to the fight. The injury made her an even more powerful symbol. She was no longer just a queen. She was living proof of sacrifice and defiance. She had faced the Romans, bled in battle, and refused to break. This personal sacrifice fired up her army. They weren't just fighting for a ruler. They were fighting for the warrior queen who had shed her own blood to defend their homeland. Her courage challenged every Roman idea about leadership and gender. While Roman emperors postured as gods from the safety of their palaces, this African queen was on the battlefield. The loss of her eye didn't end her campaign. It made it immortal. From then on, she would be known as the One-Eyed Queen of Kush, a warrior who stared down the Roman war machine and didn't blink. News of the Kushite invasion and the desecration of his statues reached Emperor Augustus. The insult was unacceptable. He couldn't let some kingdom he saw as a backwater defy him so openly. The response was swift and brutal. He sent in a new, hardened general to lead the retaliation, Gaius Petronius. Petronius was ruthless and effective, and his mission was clear: crush the Kushites and restore Roman honor. He marched south with over 10,000 infantry and 800 cavalry. Petronius's legions smashed into the Kushite forces. According to Strabo, the disciplined and better-equipped Romans overwhelmed the Kushites in open battle, pushing them out of Egypt and deep into their own territory. The Romans' advance was relentless. They stormed the city of Napata, the old religious and spiritual heart of the Kushite kingdom. The city was home to the sacred mountain of Jebel Barkal, and while the political capital was now Meroe, Napata was still deeply important. Petronius's legions sacked the city and, in his own words, razed it to the ground. Temples were destroyed, and thousands of Kushites were taken captive and sold into slavery, with 1,000 of the finest sent to Augustus himself as trophies. Petronius then set up a new fortified Roman frontier at Premnis, modern Casa Ibrim. From the Roman perspective, the war was over. They had responded with overwhelming force, destroyed a major city, and pushed the empire's borders deeper into Africa. Petronius reported a victory to Augustus, but he'd made a huge miscalculation. He had destroyed a city, but he hadn't destroyed the will of the Kushite people, and he certainly hadn't scared their queen. The destruction of Napata wasn't the end of the war. The queen was down, but she was far from out. Queen Amanirenas knew she couldn't win a conventional fight against the Roman legions. To keep fighting that way was to risk the destruction of her entire kingdom. So, she changed the rules. If she couldn't beat the Romans at their own game, she'd force them to play hers. Amanirenas launched a brilliant campaign of guerrilla warfare. She used her army's greatest asset, their knowledge of the land. The harsh Nubian deserts were treacherous for the Roman invaders, but they were home to the Kushites. Her army melted into the landscape. They began a relentless war of attrition. Small units launched surprise raids on Roman patrols and supply lines, striking fast and disappearing before the legions could respond. They made it impossible for the Romans to secure the territory they thought they'd conquered. The cost of occupying Kush, in both men and money, started to climb. Amanirenas even led another major attack, this time on the new Roman garrison at Premnis. Though Petronius managed to reinforce it just in time, the attack proved the Kushite army was still a serious threat. Some ancient sources even mention the Kushites using war elephants to terrorize the Roman soldiers. The queen became a phantom, her army a constant drain on the Roman presence. Petronius controlled the ground his legions stood on, but he couldn't control the land itself. He was stuck. His real target, the capital of Meroe, lay even further south, a dangerous march through hostile territory. He had to choose, pour even more resources into a long, bloody, and expensive war, or admit that this was a fight Rome couldn't easily win. Queen Amanirenas had successfully made the conflict too expensive for the empire to continue. She had lost battles, and she had lost a city, but she was winning the war. After 3 years of brutal fighting, from 25 to 22 BCE, both sides were exhausted. Amanirenas had fought the world's greatest military to a stalemate. Having proved her strength on the battlefield, the one-eyed queen now showed her wisdom in diplomacy. Instead of continuing the war, she sent ambassadors to negotiate a peace treaty, but she didn't send them to Petronius, the man who sacked Napata. She went over his head. Her envoys traveled all the way to the Greek island of Samos, where Emperor Augustus himself was holding court. It was a brilliant political move. She was negotiating not as a defeated subject, but as a sovereign ruler speaking directly to the emperor. One story, possibly a legend, but one that captures her spirit, tells of the message she sent. Her ambassadors presented Augustus with a bundle of golden arrows, a message with a double meaning. This is a gift from the Kandake. If you want peace, they are a token of friendship. If you want war, keep them, because you're going to need them. Augustus, a pragmatist, was in a tough spot. The war was a drain on resources with little to show for it. Fighting a guerrilla war in the desert against a queen who wouldn't quit was a losing proposition. He chose peace. The treaty that followed was one of the most remarkable in Roman history. It wasn't a surrender, it was a peace settlement, and the terms were stunningly favorable to Kush. Augustus agreed to all of the Kushite demands. First, Roman troops would withdraw completely from all Kushite territories they had occupied. Second, and most importantly, Augustus cancelled all taxes and tribute. The Kushites would not be subjects of Rome. Their independence was to be fully respected. This was an almost unheard of outcome. Nations that defied Rome were usually crushed, but Amanirenas had not only resisted, she had forced the emperor himself to back down. The peace treaty of Samos, signed around 21 BCE, would hold for centuries, beginning an era of peace and trade between the two empires. She had won. With the Roman threat gone and her kingdom's independence secured, Queen Amanirenas returned home a victor. She spent the rest of her reign, until her death, around 10 BCE, not at war, but in rebuilding her nation. The peace she won allowed Kush to flourish. Free from the threat of Roman taxation, the kingdom entered a golden age. Trade with Roman Egypt resumed and grew, but now on Kush's terms. Wealth poured into Meroe, funding new temples and monuments. Amanirenas, the warrior queen, proved to be a master of peace. Her legacy is immense. She proved it was possible to stand up to Rome and win, securing Kush's independence for another 400 years. She also cemented the power and prestige of the Kandakes. She inspired a line of strong female rulers who followed her, including Queen Amanirenas, who inherited a strong and prosperous kingdom. Today, the story of Queen Amanirenas is a powerful symbol of African resistance. In a history too often told from a European perspective, her story is a vital corrective. It's the story of an African kingdom and its queen acting with strategic brilliance and unwavering courage to defend their home. She defied not only the Roman Empire, but also the stereotypes of gender and power that have warped our view of the ancient world. Her legacy lives on, not just in the ruins of Meroe or the writings of ancient historians, but in the enduring spirit of resilience she represents. The story of the one-eyed Queen of Kush continues to inspire. Her name may not be as famous as Cleopatra's, but her achievement was arguably far greater. While Egypt fell, Kush endured. In the grand story of empires, Rome's southern frontier is often treated like a footnote, a line in the sand they simply chose not to cross. But it wasn't a line in the sand. It was a wall of iron will, forged by a queen and her people. Queen Amanirenas faced the greatest power of her time, lost an eye and lost a city, but she never lost her resolve. She met Roman steel with Kushite iron and Roman arrogance with African pride. And she fought them until the emperor himself had to accept her terms. She remains one of the most powerful yet overlooked figures in all of ancient history, a testament to African strength, female leadership, and the enduring power of a people who refuse to be conquered. The history of Africa is filled with incredible stories of kings, queens, and civilizations that have been left in the shadows for too long. If you believe these stories deserve to be told, and that the history of humanity is incomplete without them, then subscribe to our channel, share this video, and join us as we uncover the histories that have been hidden, ignored, or forgotten. Thanks for watching.